I stayed quiet at work for a long time. Not because I was weak, not because I did not notice what was happening, but because I believed silence was safer. I believed that if I kept my head down, if I did my job well, if I did not complain, then people would eventually respect me. That belief followed me for most of my life. It shaped how I spoke, how I walked into rooms, how I swallowed words that were burning to come out. This story did not begin on the day everything fell apart. It began years earlier, in small moments that seemed harmless at the time. Moments I told myself did not matter. Moments I chose to forget. I want to tell you about those moments now, because silence does not break all at once. It cracks slowly, and when it finally shatters, it cuts deep. I was raised to believe that a man's value comes from how much he can endure without making noise. My father believed that. My uncles believed that. The men around me believed that. They used to say, "Keep your mouth shut and work harder." They said, "Do not cause trouble." They said, "People who complain never go far." So I learned early how to stay quiet. I learned how to smile when something hurt. I learned how to nod even when I disagreed. I learned how to take jokes that were not really jokes. By the time I became an adult, silence felt natural. It felt like protection. It felt like maturity. That is why, when I joined the company, I told myself I would be the calm one, the reliable one, the guy who never made things difficult. I remember my first day clearly. The office smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. The lights were too bright, the walls too gray. But I felt proud standing there. I had a job, a steady job, one that paid the bills. I remember adjusting my shirt in the bathroom mirror, telling myself, "Just do your work. Do not mess this up." I told myself that this job was my chance to finally prove I was worth something. I did not know then how fear works on the human mind, how it slowly convinces you that your survival depends on staying invisible, how it whispers that speaking up will cost you everything. Fear does not scream. It speaks softly. It sounds reasonable. At first, everything was fine. People were polite enough. No one crossed any lines. But small things started happening. Things that made me uncomfortable, but not angry enough to react. My ideas would get ignored in meetings. Then minutes later, someone else would repeat the same thing. And suddenly, it was brilliant. People would laugh and nod. No one would look at me. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. Jokes started too. Little comments about how quiet I was, how serious I looked, how I needed to loosen up. They said it with smiles, so I smiled back. Because that is what you do when you want to survive. There was one guy in particular. I will call him Mark. Mark had a loud voice and an easy laugh. People liked him. Managers trusted him. He knew how to speak without really saying anything. He liked to make jokes at my expense. Nothing cruel on the surface, just enough to remind everyone where I stood. "Man, you're always so quiet," he would say. "Do you even exist over there?" People laughed. I laughed too. Inside, something tightened. But I told myself, do not be sensitive. Fear makes you doubt your own feelings. It makes you question whether you deserve respect at all. At home, things were not much better. I carried the stress with me, but I never spoke about it. My wife would ask, "How was work?" And I would say, "It was fine." That word, fine, became my shield. Fine meant I was holding things together. Fine meant I did not need help. But fine also meant I was slowly disappearing. I had responsibilities, bills to pay, people depending on me. That pressure made silence feel necessary. Because when you have mouths to feed, pride becomes a luxury. I told myself that this is how life works. That every man goes through this. That enduring discomfort is part of being grown. But deep down, something else was happening. A quiet fear was growing. Fear of losing my job. Fear of being labeled difficult. Fear of being replaced. Fear does not need threats. It feeds on uncertainty. One afternoon, during a meeting, something happened that stuck with me. I had prepared notes. I had stayed up late the night before, going over numbers, making sure everything was correct. When it was my turn to speak, I started explaining my idea. Halfway through, Mark interrupted me. He said, Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is." And then he took over. No one stopped him. The manager nodded. The room shifted its attention away from me like I had never opened my mouth. I sat there, holding my pen too tight. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. I did not say a word. That moment did something to me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it confirmed what I already feared. That my voice did not matter. I went home that night exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. My wife noticed. She asked, "Are you okay?" I said, just tired. I did not want to explain, because explaining would mean admitting I was powerless. Men are taught to fear powerlessness more than pain. Over time, the disrespect became routine. So routine that I started expecting it. When you expect less, people give you less. And you accept it. Fear trains you to lower your standards for how you are treated. I began arriving earlier than everyone else, leaving later, volunteering for extra work. I thought effort would protect me. I thought if I became useful enough, no one would dare disrespect me. But effort without boundaries only teaches people how much they can take from you. There were days I sat at my desk, staring at my screen, feeling invisible, like I was fading into the furniture. And yet, I stayed quiet, because fear told me silence was survival. One night, I sat alone in my car after work. I did not start the engine right away. I just sat there. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to feel like? But then fear spoke again. It said, at least you have a job. At least you are providing. At least you are not failing. Fear always compares your pain to someone else's worst situation. It convinces you that suffering quietly is the responsible thing to do. I believed it. I did not know then that fear was shaping every decision I made, every word I swallowed, every boundary I refused to draw. The human mind is strange like that. We fear loss more than we desire dignity. And so I stayed quiet. Until one day, silence stopped protecting me. But that comes later. For now, this was my world. A quiet man in a loud place. A provider who was slowly losing himself. If you are listening to this and something feels familiar, I want you to know something. Silence does not mean strength. And patience does not mean you deserve disrespect. I did not understand that yet. I was still learning the hard way. And in the next part, I will tell you about the man I used to be before fear taught me to stay small. Because before the office, before the humiliation, before the breaking point, there was a version of me who believed life would turn out differently. Before the office, before the quiet humiliation, before I learned how to disappear in plain sight, there was a different version of me. I do not talk about him much, not because I forgot him, but because remembering him hurts. I grew up in a small house where voices were loud and opinions were strong. My father believed in discipline. He believed in hard work. He believed that emotions were things you handled alone. He was not a bad man. He just believed survival mattered more than comfort. I watched him come home every evening with tired eyes and heavy shoulders. He never complained. He never explained his pain. He would sit at the table, eat quietly, and fall asleep in front of the TV. That was his life. As a kid, I thought that was strength. My mother tried to soften things. She spoke gently. She noticed when something was wrong. But even she learned to keep quiet around him. In our house, silence was normal. It was safe. I was a curious kid. I asked questions. I dreamed out loud. I wanted to build things, fix things, understand how the world worked. But every time I spoke too much, I heard the same words. Talk less. Focus. Be realistic. Slowly, I learned which parts of myself were welcome, and which parts were not. School was not easy for me. Not because I was dumb, but because I was sensitive. I noticed things others ignored. Tension, mood shifts, unspoken rules. That made me cautious, careful. Teachers liked me because I behaved. I never caused trouble. But inside, I wanted to be seen. I wanted someone to notice how hard I was trying. At home, praise was rare. You were expected to do your job. That taught me something dangerous. That love was earned through effort. By the time I became a teenager, I was already carrying that belief. I worked part-time jobs early, saved money, helped at home. People said I was mature for my age, responsible. What they did not see was the fear underneath. Fear of disappointing people, fear of being a burden. That fear followed me into adulthood. When I met my wife, she saw something different in me. She saw kindness. She saw loyalty. She once told me, "You care too much." She said it with a smile. I did not know how to explain that caring too much was how I survived. We built a life slowly. Not flashy, not perfect, but stable. I promised myself I would be better than my father. More present, more gentle. I wanted to give my family what I never had. Emotional safety. That promise mattered to me more than anything, which is why work became so important. Work was not just about money. It was about dignity. Every paycheck felt like proof that I was doing my part, that I was not failing. When I got the job at the company, it felt like a turning point. Like all the quiet endurance was finally paying off. I told my wife, this could be it. She smiled. She believed in me. That belief carried me through long hours. Through small insults I brushed off, because I thought I was building something bigger. But here is the truth I did not understand back then. When you grow up learning to stay quiet, you attract people who are comfortable speaking over you. I did not walk into that office as a confident man. I walked in as someone trained to endure. And people sense that. They sense who will push back and who will swallow things quietly. Mark sensed it right away. He reminded me of men I had grown up around. Loud, certain, comfortable taking space. I respected him at first, even admired him. I thought confidence meant dominance. That belief cost me more than I knew. At home, my wife started noticing changes in me. I was quieter, more distant. I did not laugh the same way. She asked me once, "Why do you look so tired all the time?" I said, "Work." That was the truth, but not the whole truth. The truth was, I was tired of holding myself in, tired of choosing silence every day. But I could not admit that, because admitting it would mean questioning everything I believed about being a man. Men are taught to solve problems quietly, to carry weight without complaint. No one teaches us what to do when the weight becomes too heavy. I remember one night lying awake next to my wife. The room was dark, quiet. I wanted to speak, to say something honest, but the words did not come, because I did not want her to see me as weak. So I stayed silent. That silence slowly built a wall between who I was and who I wanted to be. At work, my role became clearer. I was dependable, invisible. I got tasks no one wanted, deadlines no one else had time for. I did them all. People thanked me, briefly, then moved on. I told myself this was temporary. That recognition would come. Fear kept whispering, "Not yet. Do not rush. Be patient." Fear has a way of sounding like wisdom, but patience without self-respect turns into self-erasure. I see that now. Back then, I still believed in endurance. I still believed silence would protect me. I did not know how close I was to losing everything that mattered to me. Not just my job, but myself. The man I used to be believed life rewarded effort, believed kindness was strength, believed staying quiet was honorable. He did not know the world does not always play fair, that some people confuse silence for permission. In the next part, I will tell you about how that belief started to crack, how small moments at work turned into something heavier, something I could no longer ignore, because silence can survive a lot, but not everything. When I first got that job, it felt like rescue, like a rope thrown to me just as I was starting to doubt myself. I remember the email clearly. The subject line was simple, "Offer letter." My hands shook when I opened it, not from excitement alone, from relief. Relief that someone wanted me, that someone believed I was good enough. I showed it to my wife right away. She read it slowly. Then she hugged me. Her arms felt like safety. She said, "I'm proud of you." Those words stayed with me longer than the job title. That job meant stability. It meant I could stop worrying every month. It meant I could breathe. I promised myself I would not mess it up. From day one, I worked like my life depended on it. Because in my mind, it did. I learned everyone's routines, their habits, their moods. I arrived early, left late, answered emails fast. I believed being reliable would protect me. At first, people noticed. Managers nodded. Coworkers smiled. It felt good. I thought, this is it. This is where things turn around. But there was something I did not understand yet. When you give without boundaries, people stop seeing it as effort. They see it as expectation. Slowly, extra tasks became normal. Staying late became assumed. And when I did say no, even politely, the room shifted. Not openly, subtly. Looks changed. Voices cooled. That scared me. Fear makes you overcorrect. So I started saying yes again. Mark was still there. Always loud. Always confident. He spoke in meetings like he owned the place. People listened. I noticed how differently we were treated. When he interrupted, it was leadership. When I tried to speak up, it was awkward. That difference sat heavy with me. But I told myself not to compare. Comparison, I believed, was the enemy of peace. At home, life moved on. Bills, chores, quiet evenings. My wife noticed I was working more. She said, "Don't burn yourself out." I smiled and said, "It's temporary." I believed that. I believed if I just proved myself a little more, things would settle. But proving yourself never ends when respect is missing. There was a moment that stands out to me now. It was late. Most people had left. Mark walked past my desk and said, "Still here?" He laughed. I laughed too. Then he added, "Man, you're like the office furniture. Always here." It was meant as a joke. But it landed heavy. Because furniture does not get opinions. It just gets used. I went home that night quiet. My wife asked, "Did something happen?" I said, "Just tired." That answer was becoming automatic. I did not want to bring work home. I did not want to worry her. But silence has a way of leaking into everything. I stopped talking about my dreams. Stopped talking about what I wanted. I focused on survival. Fear told me ambition was risky, that wanting more might cost me what I already had. One day, during a team meeting, something small but important happened. Our manager asked for suggestions. I hesitated. I had one. A good one. But fear stepped in. What if I sound stupid? What if I get ignored again? So I stayed quiet. Mark spoke instead. He suggested something half-formed. People nodded anyway. That was the moment I realized something painful. Silence does not make you humble. It makes you invisible. I started feeling resentment. Not toward them. Toward myself. Because I was choosing this. Every day I stayed quiet. I taught them who I was. Or at least, who I allowed myself to be. But I did not know how to change it. Fear had wrapped itself around my identity. At night, I lay awake thinking about work. Replaying conversations. Imagining what I should have said. But morning came. And silence returned. The job that once felt like salvation was slowly becoming a cage. I did not notice the bars at first. Because they were made of responsibility. And fear. I thought cages only came from cruelty. I did not know they could come from expectations too. The human mind adapts to discomfort quickly. We normalize things that hurt. I told myself this was adulthood. That everyone felt this way. But something inside me knew better. Something inside me was getting tired. In the next part, I will tell you how the small disrespect turned into something sharper. Something that followed me home. Because when pressure has nowhere to go, it spills into the places you love most. Disrespect does not always announce itself. It rarely starts loud. Most of the time, it shows up small. So small that you question whether it is even real. That is how it was for me. At first, it was tone. A sigh when I spoke. An eye roll when I asked a question. Nothing anyone could complain about. But your body notices things your mouth refuses to say. I started feeling tense before meetings. My shoulders stayed tight all day. I was always preparing. Always careful. I learned when to speak. And more importantly, when not to. Mark's jokes became more frequent. Still light on the surface. "Man, you're like a ghost," he said once. Always here, but never heard. People laughed. I smiled. Inside, something sank. I told myself it was harmless. That I was being too sensitive. But sensitivity is often just awareness. One afternoon, a coworker asked me for help with a project. I stayed late to fix it. The next day, Mark presented the results. My work. He did not mention my name. People clapped. I sat there, hands folded, heart heavy. That was the first time I felt something close to anger. Not explosive, just sharp. But anger scared me. Anger felt dangerous. I was afraid that if I let it out, it would cost me everything. So I swallowed it. Swallowing anger does not make it disappear. It turns it inward. I started blaming myself. Maybe I should speak louder. Maybe I should be more confident. Maybe this is my fault. Fear does that. It turns injustice into self-doubt. At home, my wife noticed the change. I was shorter with her. Quieter. She asked, "Did I do something?" I said no. That hurt her. I could see it. But I did not know how to explain that I was losing myself at work. Men are taught to protect their families from stress, even if it means carrying it alone. So I kept carrying it. One evening, my kid asked me to help with homework. I snapped without meaning to. The look on their face stayed with me. I apologized. But the guilt stayed. That was when I realized something was wrong. Work was no longer staying at work. Disrespect had followed me home. The next week, during a meeting, Mark interrupted me again. This time, the manager did nothing. That silence from leadership felt louder than any insult. Silence from authority teaches others what is allowed. After the meeting, I went to the restroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the man looking back. His eyes looked tired. Older. I asked myself, when did I become this small? Fear answered first. It said, "You are being responsible." But another voice, quieter, asked, "At what cost?" I started dreading Mondays. Counting hours. Counting days. That dread became a background noise in my life. Always there. I did not tell anyone. Because I did not want to sound ungrateful. But gratitude should not require self-erasure. I see that now. Back then, I only knew how to endure. And endurance has limits. In the next part, I will tell you how this pressure began to break something inside my home. Because when a man carries too much silently, the people he loves feel it first. I used to believe I was good at separating things. Work stayed at work. Home stayed safe. That belief lasted longer than it should have. The truth is, stress does not ask for permission. It slips in quietly. It changes how you speak, how you listen, how you sit at the dinner table. I started coming home later. Not always because I had more work. Sometimes because I needed time to sit in the car and breathe. That car became my quiet place. The engine off. The radio silent. I would sit there and stare at the steering wheel, trying to leave the day behind. But the day came with me. When I walked through the door, my wife would smile. She always smiled first. "Hey," she would say. I said it back. But my voice sounded far away, even to me. Dinner conversations became shorter. More practical. "Did you pay the bill? What time is the appointment? Can you pick up milk tomorrow?" I was present, but not really there. She noticed. One night, she said, "You don't talk anymore." I shrugged and said, "I'm just tired." That word again. Tired. It became my excuse for everything. But tired was not the right word. I was worn down. There is a difference. Tired can be fixed with rest. Being worn down goes deeper. I stopped laughing at things I used to enjoy. I stopped planning ahead. I lived one day at a time. At work, the disrespect continued. Small. Constant. And because I never released it there, it leaked out at home. I became impatient. Short. Not cruel. Just distant. Distance hurts quietly. One evening, my wife sat next to me on the couch. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. She said, "I feel like I'm losing you." Those words hit harder than any insult at work. Because I never wanted to be that man. The man who emotionally checked out. I wanted to explain. I wanted to open my mouth and let everything pour out. But fear stopped me again. Fear said, "If you admit this, you admit you're failing." So I stayed quiet. Silence became my default response to pain. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I felt the weight of it. That weight felt heavier than my job. Because work pressure ends eventually. Family pressure sits on your heart. I told myself things would get better. That this was temporary. But time does not heal what you refuse to face. At work, Mark's behavior shifted slightly. It became more confident. More careless. He would make comments openly now. "Let him handle it," he would say. "He's got nothing else going on." People laughed. No one looked at me. I wanted to disappear. But disappearing comes at a cost. You start to disappear from yourself too. One night, my kid asked me, "Why are you always sad?" That question stopped me. Kids see things adults pretend not to. I forced a smile and said, "I'm okay." But I knew I was lying. That night, I lay awake thinking about how far things had gone. Not just at work, but in my life. I realized something painful. I had been protecting my job at the expense of my family, and protecting my image at the expense of my truth. That realization scared me, because I did not know how to fix it. I had never learned how to speak up, only how to endure. Endurance was my skill, my curse. Fear kept reminding me of everything I could lose. The house, the stability, the routine. Fear never mentions what you are already losing. I started feeling trapped. Trapped between a job that drained me and a home that felt the weight of it. Trapped by my own silence. The breaking point was getting closer. I could feel it, like pressure building behind a wall. I did not know when it would crack, only that it would. In the next part, I will tell you about the day they crossed the line. The day silence stopped being an option, because there is a moment when endurance turns into surrender, and a man can only surrender so much. There is always a moment, not dramatic at first, not loud, just clear. The kind of moment where something inside you quietly says, "This is not okay anymore." For me, it happened on a regular weekday. Nothing special about the date. Nothing that would stand out on a calendar. That is how life-changing moments usually arrive. I walked into the office already tired. The kind of tired that sleep does not touch. I remember putting my bag down and turning on my computer. Emails started coming in right away. Deadlines. Requests. Pressure. I took a breath and told myself, just get through today. The meeting was scheduled for mid-morning. A full team meeting. I had been working on a report for weeks. Long nights. Missed dinners. It mattered to me. I sat there with my notes in front of me, heart steady but guarded. When my turn came, I started explaining my findings. About halfway through, Mark leaned back in his chair and laughed. He said, "Man, do we really need this much detail?" People chuckled. I felt my face heat up. Before I could respond, the manager said, "Let's speed this up." Just like that. I stopped talking. Mark jumped in again. He simplified my work, stripped it down, turned it into something shallow. People nodded. That hurt. But the line was crossed a few minutes later. Mark said, "Honestly, this is the kind of thing you give to someone who doesn't have leadership responsibilities." Then he looked at me, directly. The room went quiet for a second. Not uncomfortable, just still. No one said anything. The manager did not intervene. That silence felt heavier than words. Something inside me cracked. Not exploded. Cracked. I felt small. Publicly reduced. Not as a joke. Not subtle. Clear. I finished the meeting without speaking. My hands were shaking when I returned to my desk. I stared at my screen, but could not focus. That comment replayed in my head. Someone who doesn't have leadership responsibilities. It was not just an insult. It was a statement about my worth. And everyone had heard it. Fear tried to speak again. It said, "Let it go. It's not worth it." But another voice answered. It said, "If you let this go, you will lose yourself completely." I went to the restroom and locked the door. I stood there breathing slowly. My reflection looked different. Not angry. Determined. For the first time in a long while, fear did not win immediately. But I still did not confront anyone. Because speaking up would change things forever. Once you speak, you cannot go back to silence. That day, work felt different. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I walked by. I had been officially labeled. Quiet people are easy targets until they decide not to be. I went home early that day. When my wife saw my face, she knew something was wrong. She did not ask questions. She just sat next to me. That silence felt supportive instead of suffocating. After a while, she said, "You don't have to carry this alone." Those words broke something open in me. I told her everything. Every joke. Every interruption. Every swallowed word. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You deserve better." That sentence stayed with me, because no one at work had ever said that. That night, I did not sleep much. I thought about the meeting, about Mark's face, about the manager's silence. I thought about my kid asking why I was always sad. And for the first time, I asked myself a hard question. What am I teaching my family by staying quiet? The answer scared me. I was teaching them that disrespect should be endured. That was not the lesson I wanted to pass on. The next morning, something in me had shifted. I was still calm, still quiet, but no longer willing to disappear. The line had been crossed. And once that happens, silence is no longer protection. It becomes permission. In the next part, I will tell you what happened when I realized no one was going to take my side. Because sometimes the hardest betrayal is not the insult itself. It is the lack of support that follows. After the meeting, something shifted in the office. Not loudly, not officially, but I felt it. People spoke around me instead of to me. Conversations ended when I approached. It was like I had crossed an invisible line. Not by doing something wrong, but by being the one who had been singled out. Discomfort makes people choose distance. I decided to speak to my manager. Not to complain, just to explain. That decision alone took more courage than I want to admit. I stood outside his office, hand hovering near the door. My heart was beating faster than it should have. Fear was still there, but it was quieter now. I knocked. He looked up and said, "What's up?" I sat down and chose my words carefully. I explained what Mark had said, how it made me feel, how it affected my ability to work. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I was calm, respectful. He listened, or at least he appeared to. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "I think you might be taking it a little personally." That sentence hit me harder than Mark's comment, because it told me everything. He continued, "Mark is just direct. That's how he communicates." I nodded. What else could I do? I left the office feeling smaller than when I entered. That was the moment I realized something painful. No one was coming to save me. At lunch, I sat alone. People who used to sit nearby chose different tables. Not because they disliked me, but because association feels risky. Silence protects the majority. I did my work quietly. That afternoon, Mark walked past my desk and said, "No hard feelings, right?" He smiled. I forced a smile back, but something inside me went cold. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a system, and I was on the wrong side of it. That evening, I told my wife about the conversation with my manager. She shook her head and said, "That's not okay." Hearing someone validate my feelings felt strange, like a language I was not used to hearing spoken. She asked, "What are you going to do?" I did not have an answer, because for the first time, silence was no longer working. But speaking felt dangerous. I was stuck. At work, Tasks started being reassigned. Projects I had worked on were given to others. No explanation. That hurt. Not because of pride, but because effort was being erased. I realized how fragile my position was. Years of quiet work. One uncomfortable moment. And suddenly, I was expendable. Fear came back stronger. It said, "You pushed too far. You should have stayed quiet." Fear loves hindsight. It convinces you that self-respect is a mistake. But another voice reminded me. This started before you spoke. I started documenting things. Not because I planned revenge, but because I needed clarity. Dates, comments, meetings. Writing things down made me realize how long this had been happening. Patterns became visible. I was not imagining it. That knowledge gave me strength. Quiet strength. But it also gave me fear. Because clarity removes denial. And denial had been my shelter. One night, my wife asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know." That was the most honest answer I had given in years. I felt alone. At work. In my head. But not at home. And that difference mattered. I realized something important. Silence isolates you. But truth connects you. I had been choosing silence everywhere. And it had cost me lies I did not even know I had. The loneliness at work was heavy. But the loneliness I had been creating was heavier. I did not know what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing. I could not go back to pretending nothing was wrong. In the next part, I will tell you about the lowest point. The moment I almost gave up completely. Because when you realize you are alone, despair comes fast. And you have to decide whether to disappear or stand. There are moments in life when the noise finally stops. Not because things get better, but because you are too tired to keep reacting. That night, I came home later than usual. The house was quiet. Lights dim. My wife was already asleep. I did not wake her. I sat alone in the living room, staring at nothing. That is when the weight hit me. Not all at once. Slowly, like something settling on my chest. I replayed everything. Every meeting. Every joke. Every silence. I thought about how invisible I felt. How easily I had been dismissed. And then I thought about myself. How I let it happen. That thought hurt the most. Fear started whispering again. But this time, it sounded different. It said, "What's the point? It's never going to change." That is how despair speaks. Not loud. Just tired. I felt trapped. Not just by my job, but by the version of myself I had become. I went outside and sat on the steps. The air was cold. I breathed slowly. I thought about quitting. About walking away from everything. But quitting without dignity felt like surrender. And staying felt like erasing myself. I felt stuck between two losses. That is a dangerous place for the human mind. I thought about my family. About the look on my kid's face when I snapped. That look hurt more than any insult. I realized something painful. I was becoming someone I did not respect. And that scared me. I did not want my child to learn silence from me the way I did from my father. That realization cracked something open. I cried quietly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to let the pressure escape. Crying did not make me weak. It made me honest. I admitted something to myself that night. I was afraid. Not of losing my job, but of losing my identity. Work had become the measure of my worth. And when work turned against me, I felt empty. That is not a healthy way to live. I did not know what the solution was yet, but I knew something had to change. I went back inside and sat at the table. I opened my notebook. I started writing. Not facts. Feelings. I wrote about how small I felt. How angry. How tired. Putting it on paper made it real. And once something is real, it can be faced. That night, I did not sleep much. But I felt clearer. Not better. Clearer. Clarity is uncomfortable. But it is honest. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm. Nothing at work had changed yet. But something in me had. I stopped asking myself why this was happening. Instead, I asked a different question. What am I going to do about it? That question scared me. But it also gave me energy. Because despair comes from feeling powerless. And that night, I had taken the first step out of it. In the next part, I will tell you about the proof I never intended to use. The thing I had been collecting quietly. And how it changed everything. Because sometimes, the quietest people see the most. I never planned to collect proof. That part matters. I wasn't plotting revenge. I wasn't building a case. I wasn't trying to trap anyone. At first, I was just trying to understand what was happening to me. When you live inside quiet disrespect for too long, your mind starts playing tricks on you. You begin to wonder if you're imagining things. If you're overreacting. If you're too sensitive. Writing things down started as a way to ground myself. To hold on to reality. I bought a small notebook. Nothing fancy, just something I could keep in my bag. The first entry was simple. A date. A meeting. One sentence Mark had said. That was it. I remember staring at the page afterward, thinking, why does writing this down feel so heavy? It felt heavy because it made things real. Once something is written, you can't pretend it didn't happen. At first, I only wrote when something clearly crossed a line. A public comment. An interruption. A dismissal. I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind. But then patterns started showing up. I noticed how often Mark interrupted me compared to others. How often my work was reassigned without explanation. How meetings shifted whenever I tried to speak. It wasn't random. That realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because I wasn't crazy. Terrifying because it meant this was real. I also started saving emails. Again, not with intention, just instinct. Emails where my ideas were ignored, then later repeated by someone else. Messages assigning me extra work late in the day with impossible deadlines. Responses that praised my effort privately, but never publicly. Each one felt small on its own. Together, they told a story. I didn't share any of this with my coworkers, not even my wife at first, because I wasn't ready to face what it meant. I still hoped things would change on their own. Hope is powerful like that. It convinces you to wait longer than you should. At work, the atmosphere stayed tense. I was polite, professional, quiet, but I was no longer invisible to myself. That mattered. One afternoon, Mark sent an email to the team. He summarized a project I had worked on for weeks. My name was nowhere in it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Olmi would have swallowed it. Moved on. This time, I saved the email. Not angrily. Calmly. I remember thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm doing it. That night, I told my wife about the notebook. I didn't show it to her. I just told her it existed. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't say, be careful. She didn't say, let it go. She said, I'm glad you're paying attention. Those words stayed with me, because for a long time, I had been taught not to pay attention to myself. The notebook became part of my routine. Not obsessive, not emotional, just factual. Dates, words, actions. No insults, no commentary, just truth. Writing like that felt strange at first, but it gave me control. When something happened at work, I no longer had to carry it in my head all day. I could place it somewhere. That alone eased some of the pressure. But something else happened too. I started noticing how carefully people choose their words around power. How silence protects some people more than others. I noticed how Mark spoke differently to managers than he did to me. How his tone softened when authority was present. That awareness changed how I saw him. He wasn't fearless. He was strategic. And that realization gave me clarity. Fear thrives in confusion. Clarity weakens it. I stopped blaming myself so much. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? I started asking, what's really happening here? That shift was quiet, but powerful. At the same time, my workload increased again. More pressure, less recognition. I could feel the company slowly pushing me toward the edges. I didn't fight it yet. I watched. There is power in observation. One evening, while organizing files, I found something unexpected. An old project summary. One that clearly showed my contributions. With timestamps. Versions. I realized something then. I wasn't just documenting disrespect. I was documenting my value. That thought shook me, because I had forgotten my value for a long time. The company hadn't taken it from me. I had slowly given it away. That realization hurt, but it also strengthened me. The notebook grew thicker, not because things got worse overnight, but because they had been bad for a long time. I just hadn't allowed myself to see it. I wasn't planning to use any of it. I still hoped things would resolve quietly. But deep down, something had changed. I was no longer powerless. I had my voice, even if I hadn't spoken it yet. And that made all the difference. The next few weeks felt different. Not because anything changed at work. Not because Mark suddenly became kinder. But because I had a quiet power inside me. It was the power of knowing the truth. Every morning, I would open my notebook before starting the day. I didn't read all of it. Just glanced. Reminded myself I wasn't imagining things. Some people might call it paranoia. I called it preparation. Because when you've been invisible too long, you start noticing patterns everyone else ignores. I noticed the way Mark's jokes always landed when the manager was distracted. The way my contributions were quietly shifted to someone else. The way recognition was reserved for the loudest voices. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it was predictable. Predictable feels safer than chaos, and I clung to that predictability. One evening, after work, my wife asked me, "Do you want to fight back?" I laughed softly. I don't know what fighting back looks like. She took my hand and said, "You don't have to fight them. Just don't let them erase you." That sentence struck deeper than anything Mark had ever said. Because the truth is, you can't control other people. You can only control yourself. Your words, your actions, your choices. I realized I had been giving away my agency for years. Not just at work, but in life. And it had cost me peace, joy, energy. I began preparing quietly. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with intention. I started documenting more carefully. Email threads, project versions, times and dates. I wanted clarity, nothing more. Because when the moment came, I wanted to act from truth. Not emotion, not frustration. Truth. There was a strange calm in that. A sense of readiness. It changed the way I walked into the office. I no longer flinched when Mark spoke. I no longer measured my words for approval. I was still quiet, still careful, but I was aware. That awareness gave me confidence. And with confidence came patience. I waited for patterns to repeat. And they did. Every time someone tried to undermine me, I noted it. Every time work was reassigned, I recorded it. I realized something else too. The disrespect was not personal. It was structural. A system that rewarded arrogance and visibility, while quietly punishing those who endured. Understanding that freed me from guilt. I was not failing. I was surviving. And survival had value. I even started to notice small kindnesses. Some coworkers quietly helped me. Some managers, though blind to Mark's behavior, offered support when asked. Those small gestures reminded me I wasn't invisible to everyone. I learned to focus on those things. To build quiet alliances. To stop imagining the worst in everyone. It changed my inner world. Instead of fear, I felt clarity. Instead of shame, I felt validation. Instead of invisibility, I felt preparation. And I realized the most important proof was not in emails or documents. It was in myself. I knew my worth. I knew what I contributed. I knew what I endured. And that knowledge, quietly carried, became a shield. Months later, there was a moment I never expected. Mark made a mistake on a project. One small error. Nothing catastrophic. But it was visible to everyone. The manager noticed. I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat. I didn't correct him publicly. But inside, I felt a shift. I knew the game had changed. Not because of him. Not because of anyone else. Because I had grown strong quietly. The notebook, the records, the clarity, they weren't weapons. They were mirrors. They reflected my reality. My efforts. My endurance. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Because freedom doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from truth. And sometimes truth is enough. That night, I told my wife everything again. Not out of necessity, out of gratitude. "I've been surviving," I said softly. "And I finally see it." She smiled. "You always did. You just had to see it too." And I had. Finally, I wasn't the same man who first walked into that office. Quiet, afraid, invisible. I was the man who endured, observed, and, most importantly, remembered. And remembering became my strength. Because in a world that dismisses you quietly, the quietest record can hold the loudest truth. After months of endurance, observation, and quiet preparation, I thought I had control. I thought I had a handle on the chaos. I thought I was ready. I was wrong. It happened slowly, not like a disaster, but more like winter creeping into the bones. Small things piled on top of each other until they became unbearable. It started with a mistake I didn't make. A small data error on a project. One I had double-checked myself. One that no one noticed, but was blamed on me. When the manager called me in, I could see it in his eyes. Disappointment, frustration, and the quiet approval of Mark, smiling from the back of the room like he had won some invisible prize. I tried to explain, calmly, factually, documented proof in my notebook. But words bounced off the wall. Nobody cared. Not really. I left that room feeling the old weight return. That sinking feeling in the chest. The one I thought I had escaped. At my desk, emails piled up. Deadlines I didn't create were expected of me. A project I had led weeks earlier was reassigned. I felt invisible again. I went home that evening, shoulders heavy, heart heavier. The living room was quiet. My wife saw me enter and didn't say anything. She just sat, watched, waited. Her quiet presence hurt and comforted at the same time. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to fight, but I couldn't. I couldn't risk losing more. Instead, I sank into the couch and let the tears come. The kind of tears that are quiet but shake your chest. I thought about my kid asking why I was always sad. I thought about all the dinners I missed, all the evenings spent at my desk pretending to be okay. I felt like I had failed, not just at work, not just at home, but as a man. I had carried so much silently, so responsibly, so patiently, and here I was, broken. The fall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, slow, excruciating. I remembered my father's words from childhood. Men don't cry. Men endure. But endurance doesn't make you invincible. It makes you fragile in ways you only notice when everything collapses. I went to bed that night, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't rest. I couldn't stop the questions in my head. Was it all worth it? Did I do enough? Am I failing my family? The fall hit hardest in those quiet hours, when no one else was watching. When all the masks come off. When you face yourself without explanation. In the middle of the night, I walked to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee I didn't drink, sat at the table. I thought about the notebook, the emails, the proof. All of it. It had been my lifeline, my shield. But now it felt useless. Even proof couldn't stop the hollow ache. I realized something terrifying. Even when you are right, life doesn't always recognize it. Even when you endure and document and survive, the system doesn't reward patience. It punishes you quietly. It erases you slowly. And I felt erased. I thought about quitting everything, leaving the job, walking away from the life I had built, even leaving my family. The thought scared me. And yet, it also tempted me. Because when survival comes at the expense of self-respect, surrender seems easier than endurance. I went back to bed before dawn, staring at the ceiling again. Tears dried on my face. The pillow soaked. I didn't sleep. Morning came, and the fall didn't end. I walked into work, feeling invisible, unseen, unheard. And even with all my proof, all my preparation, nothing could change that. Mark greeted me with a smile. The manager gave me instructions without eye contact. The team continued their routines. And I realized the most brutal truth of all. Sometimes the world doesn't reward patience. Sometimes endurance alone isn't enough. The fall had stripped me down to my rawest self. No pride, no illusions, just reality. And in that reality, I had a choice. I could stay silent forever. I could let them erase me completely. Or I could finally do something. I didn't know what yet. But I knew I could no longer pretend. I could no longer disappear. The notebook in my bag felt heavy that day. Not with burden, but with potential. It was a tool, yes, but also a reminder. A reminder that I had seen clearly. That I had survived quietly. And that perhaps, that was enough to start fighting back. The fall was complete. I was at rock bottom. And in that dark place, I realized the only way to climb out was to face everything I had been avoiding. Not just at work, not just with Mark, but with myself. And that, I realized, was going to be the hardest part of all. After months of quiet endurance, subtle disrespect, and a crushing fall, something unexpected happened. Not in a meeting, not in a dramatic confrontation, not with an announcement. It started with a single email, a small one, from a client I had worked with months ago. They were praising the work I had done, not Mark's, mine. Specifically, the words felt strange on the screen. Validation after months of invisibility. Acknowledgement after endless erasure. At first, I ignored it. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Luck. Coincidence. But the emails kept coming. Notes from clients. Compliments from other teams. Private messages acknowledging my effort. I realized something I had forgotten. The truth cannot be erased. No matter how quietly a system tries to suppress it. I started feeling a small spark of confidence. Not arrogance. Just recognition that my work mattered. Even if no one in the office cared to see it. Then came the bigger twist. One afternoon, the manager called me into his office. I prepared for criticism, for reprimand. Instead, he said, "I've noticed your work on these projects. It's solid, reliable. You should know that we value your contributions." The words hit me in a way I did not expect. Not because of praise alone, but because acknowledgement can shift power quietly. Suddenly, the dynamic in the room felt different. Mark was there. He tried his usual bravado, but I saw something in his eyes. Slight uncertainty, a hesitation. For the first time, the office felt like a place I could breathe. Not completely safe, not perfect, but manageable. I realized something important in that moment. People respond to truth when it is carried steadily and without rage. The notebook, the documentation, my quiet endurance, everything had prepared me, not to confront with anger, but to confront with clarity. From that day, I noticed small changes, not dramatic shifts, not overnight transformations, just subtle movements of recognition. I started speaking in meetings more confidently, not loudly, not aggressively, but with calm authority. People listened. I realized the twist wasn't in external validation alone. It was in the change inside me. I had finally remembered my own worth. I had reclaimed it quietly, privately, and once that happened, the world had no choice but to acknowledge it. One night at home, I told my wife about everything that had happened, how the recognition started small, how I had felt invisible for so long, how the notebook, the emails, and the proof had given me a strange kind of power. She listened, then said, "You finally see it. That's all that matters. The rest will follow." She was right. The twist wasn't a dramatic confrontation or revenge. It wasn't shouting or exposure. It was internal. It was quiet strength becoming visible. And that, I realized, is how real change works. It starts inside. And when you carry your truth steadily, others eventually see it too. The world still had challenges. Mark still existed. Disrespect could still happen. But I no longer feared it. Because I had learned a lesson that no meeting, email, or insult could erase. The quietest person can hold the loudest truth. And sometimes, that truth is the only weapon you need. Looking back now, it's strange to think about that time in my life. All the tension, all the silent suffering, all the nights I stayed awake, questioning myself. I realize something now that I didn't fully understand then. Life doesn't give warnings. It doesn't always come with guidance. Sometimes, you just wake up one day, and you have to figure it out on your own. I learned that silence can be both a shield and a trap. It can protect you from impulsive decisions. It can protect you from immediate confrontation. But if silence is all you practice, it can erode your sense of self. It can bleed into your home, your relationships, and your peace of mind. I learned this the hard way. I also learned the value of observation, of quietly watching patterns, of documenting facts without emotion. That notebook I never meant to use became a mirror, reflecting what I had endured. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't ammunition for revenge. It was a lifeline. Sometimes, the world doesn't recognize your worth right away. Sometimes it doesn't reward endurance, patience, or quiet loyalty. But that doesn't make those qualities meaningless. What it does mean is that you must carry your worth within yourself. You must know your value, even when no one else does. I also learned that validation can come quietly, from unexpected places, from clients, colleagues, even strangers who notice your effort without making a scene. Those small affirmations add up. They remind you of your purpose. They remind you that truth, eventually, cannot stay hidden. Most importantly, I learned that courage isn't always loud. It doesn't always come in a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes, courage is quiet. It is patience, endurance, clarity, and eventually, action. It is standing up for yourself calmly, steadily, without losing your dignity. I finally understood that the hardest battles are often the internal ones. The fight to maintain your self-respect. The fight to carry yourself with honesty, even when the world dismisses you. The fight to protect your family from your own hidden despair. And I realized, the most meaningful victories are not over others. They are victories over fear, over self-doubt, over the temptation to disappear or give up. I don't say this lightly. I don't say it as someone who has all the answers. I say it as someone who has endured, stumbled, and nearly broken, but came out stronger on the other side. Now, when I go to work, I carry myself differently, not with arrogance, not with bitterness, but with quiet confidence. I speak when it matters. I listen when it matters. I act with awareness, not reaction. At home, I show up differently too. I notice my family. I don't carry the weight of work into the living room anymore. I laugh more. I argue less. I explain my feelings honestly. I let them in. Because the truth is, endurance isn't just about surviving the workplace. It's about surviving life. It's about protecting what matters. And it's about knowing that your voice, your worth, and your truth are never truly lost. So if I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight with rage to defend yourself. You don't have to disappear to protect others. Your strength is in your clarity. Your courage is in your patience. Your victory is in your truth. And if you carry that quietly, steadily, with honesty, no one can take it from you. Because life will test you. People will challenge you. And injustice will appear in ways you never expect. But the real battle is always within. And when you win that, nothing can break you. That is the lesson I learned. The lesson I carry every day. The lesson I hope my child will learn too. And in that quiet knowledge, I finally feel at peace.